Hey, it's Max from UNFTR. You know, the friendly neighborhood socioeconomic guy for the MeidasTouch network. And today, I'm calling this one informally the labor and resignation episode, because we got a bunch of labor data to cull through, but the resignation part might not be what you think. The resignation piece refers to the slow and steady acceptance and resignation creeping into the economic coverage on the nation's mainstream news outlets that the economy is broken. In fact, let's kick it off with a clip of the McDonald CEO stunning the CNBC panel into silence by spitting facts.
And what we see is it's really kind of a two-tier economy. If you're upper income, earning over $100,000, things are good. Stock markets are near all-time highs. You're feeling, quite confident about things. You're seeing international travel. All those barometers of upper income consumers are doing quite well. What we see with middle and lower income consumers is actually a different story. It's that consumers under a lot of pressure. In our industry, traffic for lower income consumers is down double digits. And it's because people are either choosing to skip a meal. So we're seeing breakfast. People are actually skipping breakfast, or they're choosing to just eat at home.
There it is, a two-tier economy. McDonald's is currently revisiting prices and offers because their clients are starting to skip meals. And I think that's what they sell, right? Now listen, today we have a lot to get through, and I'm going to keep this nice and tight, but I should note that this resignation doesn't extend completely throughout the entire media ecosystem.
So folks, here's the deal. Whatever happens with tomorrow's jobs report, I'm going to say the economy is doing better than you think.
Now, the economy is doing better than you think. You know, there's reality, and then there's Fox News. Now, Kudlow was getting ahead of the labor figures because he knew they were going to be terrible. But as long as they keep telling you everything's fine, they can keep you psychologically traumatized and afraid to speak out about what's actually going on. So let's talk about what's actually going on. Let's go. Before the labor figures came out, we had the Challenger Gray and Christmas numbers that reported layoff announcements had jumped 39% in July. Now, simultaneously, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported a bigger than expected drop in job openings as well. And yet here we sit with an unemployment rate that is virtually unchanged. So I want to dive into this a little bit because there are competing narratives about the labor market that are a little confusing. But first, a quick note on the actual jobless claims that did eventually come out. Not only were they once again higher than expected for August at 237,000, but we shed another 7,000 manufacturing jobs. And I'm only highlighting that last bit because of one of the make-believe reasons for Trump's tariff war was, what was it again?
Jobs and factories will come roaring back into our country.
Oh, that's right. Manufacturing jobs will come roaring back into the country. No, we're actually losing manufacturing jobs every single month. But let's talk about the tension in the labor market because there are competing forces that are muddying the waters. And this is going to play into our monetary policy going forward and our bit about the Fed today. So the chief economist at ADP said that employers and employees have been, quote, whipsawed by uncertainty. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. So ADP tracks private employment, and these figures are taken directly from their national payroll database. So even though it's a smaller sample set than the broader picture we usually get from the government, they're usually spot on. Because you'll notice that the government figures are constantly being revised, and we covered that in a recent Meidas video. The summer figures, for example, the ones that came out to begin with, were terrible. And then the subsequent releases revised the job figures down even more, like dramatically. But the ADP numbers are as true as they get, and it shows an overall slowdown that they say is the result of skittish consumers, labor shortages, and AI disruptions. Now, we're going to have the AI discussion at length another day, but for now, let's talk about the labor shortage issue, because that's an interesting one. We know that there are about as many job openings as there are people looking for work, supposedly. Now, there can be a host of factors that contribute to this, like geography, skill matching, etc. But one of the things the Trump administration is trying to do is keep those job openings high, because then they can point to that and say, look, the jobs are out there, but people just don't want to take them. But there's a reason why openings are still increasing in an otherwise soft labor market. And for that, let's hear from Fed Governor Christopher Waller, who I might remind you is considered a Trump loyalist on the Fed board. So keep that in mind as you're listening to this.
But I think there's a lot of other stuff that is driving the labor market down. And I do think it's all on labor demand. A lot of talk about immigration. It's all about immigration. But if immigration was just a decreasing labor supply and labor demand was stable, you would see wages starting to be bid up. You'd start seeing vacancies going up. We're not seeing that. So all the labor supply is doing is masking this declining, falling labor demand, which from a Fed's point of view is not a good thing. Our goal is not to say, hey, the unemployment rate is great while labor demand and job creation is falling.
Immigration. We talked about that in another recent Meidas video. Part of the Trump team calculus behind mass deportation is that they know their policies are crushing the economy and liquidating the job market. So by stopping the flow of immigration and engaging in mass deportation, they're gutting the low-wage jobs that are typically done by migrant workers and day laborers. And now you have a Fed governor basically saying as much. Now, some other worrying figures right now are among hourly workers. And for that, take a listen to the ADP chief economist, Neela Richardson, whom I mentioned earlier.
Firm behavior, employer behavior has changed quite a bit since the pandemic, and you can see it in the hours worked. Right now, average hours is about 2 hours less a week, according to ADP payroll data, than it was before the pandemic. That's consistent with a hiring pattern where you're keeping people on payroll, but they're working fewer hours. Before you cut a job, you'll cut an hour. Right. And so what we're seeing is maybe an underemployed worker as opposed to an unemployed worker.
Hourly workers are seeing a cut to their hours, which usually precedes outright elimination of the role that they fulfill. This is standard pre-recession operating protocol. Rather than hire new people, which is why new hires are stagnant, you maintain your workforce and start cutting back on hourly workers before eliminating those positions altogether. And immediately on the heels of this, it happens every single time. The cuts start among full-time workers. Now, it's a measure of last resort that employers actually don't like because it's harder to hire, retrain, and fill these positions when things turn around. But full-time layoffs themselves are lagging indicators in the economy exactly because employers consider this a measure of last resort. It just means that they've exhausted all other cost-cutting measures. And that's exactly where we are. Now, let me give you two reasons why some of the figures sort of present as though we're in a normal economy. Now, the first part is that more people are leaving the job hunt entirely. These are called discouraged workers, and they're not counted in the unemployment figures. And the second part is that some low-wage jobs are available and being filled by U.S.-born hourly workers because of our immigration policy. And before you say, well, I guess in a way Trump's strategy is working because maybe immigrants were taking our jobs, remember that the higher-paying jobs aren't being filled and openings are increasing at the lower end. And we already know that wage growth hasn't kept up with inflation in the lower and middle tiers, resulting in people actually skipping meals. And those manufacturing jobs, they're not coming because they never were. Okay, so what happens now? Well, this is where it gets interesting and where we're headed into uncharted waters. So to set the table for this part, I have one more clip for you.
I just need a yes or no. Did Donald Trump lose the 2020 presidential election?
Thank you, Senator Warren. Joe Biden was certified by Congress as the president of the United States.
Right. So did Donald Trump lose that election?
As I just said, Joe Biden was certified by Congress. Did Donald Trump lose that election? Can you say the words Donald Trump lost that election? Are you independent enough to say that? The Congress certified Joe Biden as president.
All right.
Yeah. See, while the whole world was focused on the contentious hearing with RFK, whose head, by the way, looks like it's going to pop like a zit at any moment, there was another hearing on the Hill to vet Stephen Myron to fill Kugler's vacant seat at the Federal Reserve. That was a refresher. Myron is the architect of Trump's tariff policy because he wrote a white paper in 2024 about how Trump's tariffs would work based on a theory that was debunked in 1971 called the Triffin dilemma. Now, we covered that one also in a prior video, so no need to rehash that here. But Myron is a straight-up apologist and a sycophant who deserves to be on the hook for this failed tariff regime. Instead, he's on leave right now from his job at the White House to serve on the Fed board pending confirmation. Trump is trying to stack the deck with loyalists so he can control Fed policy and presumably force them to lower interest rates, which will benefit exactly no one on the lower end of the economic spectrum. But it will benefit large corporate real estate companies in a significant way by allowing them to refinance commercial mortgages, which are shorter in duration and tied to the federal funds rate. Warren's point is that the Fed is supposed to be independent and show no political fealty to the president. But Myron can't even admit that Trump lost the election to Biden. So much for that notion. But there are two bigger reasons that Trump wants to control the Fed. Now, one is that he needs a Fed that will sit on its hands as the stablecoin bills make their way through the Senate because they effectively sideline the Federal Reserve and allow Trump to build a private shadow central bank operation that benefits his family. The second reason is that he's going to need the Fed to print a boatload of money to cover the massive sinkhole that's opening up in the economy due to his mismanagement. So right now, the primary funding mechanism that the Trump administration is relying on is tariff revenue. But if the courts strike down his ability to levy these taxes on our importers, then we have to issue more debt. And our debt is getting really expensive. But the data is softening so quickly that the court decision may not matter because the income taxes they also rely on are going to decline as a result of the economy falling apart, leading them to borrow more expensive money. So we're already damned if we do and damned if we don't with respect to tariffs, and because they refuse to increase taxes on the wealthy. So this leaves him with only one choice: print more money. And he knows it. It's just a matter of when. Okay, so to wrap up, let's thread together these seemingly disparate points so that we can show the entire picture. Okay, so we started this with the McDonald CEO admitting that we have a two-tier economy and that the bottom tier, which is really 90% of the country, is falling apart so quickly that people are skipping meals. Then there's Fox's Kudlow saying that we don't have a problem, but let's take him off the table for a minute. Then we had Trump saying that manufacturing jobs would come roaring back because of tariffs, but we've been bleeding manufacturing jobs ever since he took office. Now we've had more layoffs month after month, more people giving up on the job search, and hours being cut back, all of which precipitates mass layoffs in any formal recession. And then we have job openings that are keeping pace with layoffs, but the layoffs are across private payrolls and non-farm payrolls alike, and a Trump loyalist Fed governor admitting that the openings are a result of Trump's immigration policy and thereby at the bottom rung of the economic ladder. So ready? Let's pull them all together. Capitalism moves in cycles, highs and lows, boom and bust. Our central contention is that the vast majority of this country never actually recovered from the global financial crisis. Only the top tier did, as the McDonald CEO noted. Wage growth has barely kept pace with inflation, and sometimes not even at all. So when the U.S. economy started its slow and painful recovery from the subprime mortgage collapse, and here's where everything changed relative to prior bust cycles in the capitalist system, our response to the crisis was to print more money than the world had ever seen and infuse it into the economy. Only it didn't reach the entire economy. Instead, corporations used it to recover by refinancing their debt, purging their balance sheets of toxic assets, and buying back shares at a rate that we've never seen before in the United States. As a result, the moneyed class got flush with cash and got rid of debt. And even after they fully recovered, we forgot to shut the money spigot. And so they just kept reinvesting it right back into the stock market and other speculative assets like crypto, and it started to compound at historic rates. So the result of this is the greatest widening in inequality in this country since the run-up to the Great Depression. Even prior to this money printing bonanza, the U.S. industrial policy, by the way, was crafted by the neoliberal think tanks that gave us policies like NAFTA. And our corporations went multinational, fueled by neoliberal deregulation, and our money went to work elsewhere building infrastructure around the world that sidelined the American worker in favor of packing corporate earnings and exploiting cheap labor abroad. And as the nature of work changed in the United States, more and more people fell out of the full-time job market. The boomer generation started to retire en masse, and relatively few Americans, as we've talked about, in reality, it's about 60%, are gainfully employed in this economy. And so that's how we wound up in a situation where we're no longer able to manage the downturns and prop up the real economy because it simply doesn't take as many of us to fuel the corporate, financial, and service sector engines that it used to. So when every administration, starting with the Reagan administration, cut taxes on the people who were accumulating most of the revenue and the earnings in this country, we started depleting the coffers. And every time we added to the bloated military budget to fight foreign entanglements, and even after we ended most of them and kept the budget at the same ridiculously high rates, the deficit kept growing. Now, the only thing that kept us running was the ability to flood the market with money and sell U.S. treasuries. Only now, the cost of U.S. debt, because of Trump, continues to rise because the rest of the world is A, losing faith in our ability to manage the economy, and B, because they're so pissed off at us for this tariff war. So that means that we have to resort to selling more short-term treasuries because those rates are lower because they're shorter in duration. In other words, the world trusts us to pay back our debt if it's over the next couple of years, but 30 years is becoming a bridge too far if we keep going at this rate. And that's why our man needs to control the Fed. Short-term treasury notes are actually influenced by the federal funds rate from the Fed. Now, the Fed can also do something, as we just recently talked about, called the yield curve control, which is something we haven't done since the 1950s, and that is to overpurchase our own short-term treasuries to bring the rates down in the event that the world starts refusing to buy those. Thus, the Great Resignation. Every move the Trump administration is pulling right now demonstrates that they too are resigned to destroying this economy just to preserve the tax cuts. See, they know that they can simultaneously prop up the system and milk it for all it's worth through loose monetary policy. All they need to do is ensure that the debt ceiling is lifted, which they accomplished in the Big Beautiful Bill Act, and to control the Federal Reserve, which means they're in the process of doing it by appointing Myron and firing Lisa Cook to gain control of the Board of Governors. They have no intention of bringing back manufacturing jobs. I don't think they ever did. They just want control of the money printing machines at the Fed. So instead of trying to prop up the bulk of the labor market, they're looking to mask the labor figures by blowing out the bottom of it and deporting migrant labor. So look, I know it's a bummer to go through this exercise, but we have to know what's going on. If or when this nightmare administration ever ends, we have so much to repair, but you can't fix something if you don't know how and where it's broken. So at least now you know. For the MeidasTouch Network, I'm Max from UNFTR. Connect with me on Blue Sky and follow us on YouTube at UNFTR. And thanks as always to the Meidas Mighty. Until next time, heads down, elbows up.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.